Production and distribution of City Club forums on IdeaStream are made possible by the generous support of PNC and the Raskin Family Fund, with additional funding from Cleveland State University, Robert Conrad, and the Payne Fund.
Good afternoon and welcome to the City Club of Cleveland. My name is Paul Harris and I am president of the City Club's Board of Directors. I am privileged to introduce today's speaker, United States Senator Sherrod Brown. In his 1931 book, The Epic of America, writer and historian John Truslow Adams wrote of the American dream, describing it as, quote, that dream of a land which life should be better and richer and fuller for everyone, with opportunity for each according to ability or achievement, end quote. Recent studies indicate that this American dream is becoming further out of reach for many Americans. A Pew Research Institute analysis just a few weeks ago found that from 2000 to 2014, the share of adults living in middle-income households declined in 203 of 229 U.S. metropolitan areas examined. The analysis also found that in many metropolitan areas, the income tiers above and below the middle class have also grown over time, in effect creating a hollowing out of the middle class and contributing to growing economic inequality across the country. Of course, the decline in the middle class has been a prominent theme in both the Democratic and Republican primary campaigns, as candidates on both sides of the proverbial aisle use it to pitch their ideas on health care, housing reform, college education costs, job creation, and other issues. Most seem to agree that a thriving middle class is integral to a robust American economy, but there are far-ranging ideas on how best to achieve that objective. So it's in this context that Senator Brown joins us today for his fifth, I think it's the fifth, it could be more, but it's at least the fifth City Club of Cleveland address. In previous introductions, I've noted that Senator Brown has been a wonderful friend and supporter of the City Club of Cleveland, and I've also referred to his famous 2001 address via Skype from Washington as just one of many examples of that support. We greatly appreciate his ongoing support of the City Club, a true Cleveland treasure. Senator Brown was first elected to the United States Senate in 2006. Prior to his election to the Senate, he served as a United States Representative for Ohio's 13th District, Ohio's Secretary of State, and a member of Ohio's General Assembly. He started his career as a teacher in Ohio's public schools. And as everyone here knows or should know, he's married to Pulitzer Prize-winning columnist Connie Schultz, and they reside in Cleveland. Now, the senator has recently enjoyed an even higher than usual national profile. Of course, he serves as ranking member of the Senate Committee on Banking, Housing, and Urban Affairs. And today, he's featured along with other prominent leaders in a Wall Street Journal series on the state of banking. I noticed that picture they have of you look like you're 25 years old. Did you notice that? Yeah. And his profile and stature have increased due to speculation as to whether he will be the vice presidential running mate for presumptive nominee Clinton. Now, on that latter subject, the senator told CNN's Jack Tapper, quote, I love the job I'm doing. I'm just not going to give you a different answer. You can keep trying, end of quote. So perhaps one of our audience members today will try again during our traditional City Club question and answer period. Ladies and gentlemen, members and friends of the City Club of Cleveland, please join me in welcoming United States Senator Sherrod Brown.
Oh, well done. Very good. Paul, thank you. Paul, thank you so much. And a special shout out that already was done, but towards Paul for his work at the City Club. He has done more introductions, served as the president of the City Club longer than anyone else, and thank you for your service here to the Citadel of Free Speech and your service in so many other ways at Key Bank. Also, I've mentioned before when Paul's introduced me that he is the chair of our Judicial Selection Committee for the Southern District federal judges, and he is in the process of reassembling our committee to choose a judge to recommend to me, and I recommend to the president for a federal judgeship in the Southern District. So thank you for a totally volunteer effort. My wife Connie is here, and she is flanked by two of her and my favorite Clevelanders, Dolly Minter and Carol Hoover. So I'm so glad that all three of you are here. As I think you probably have heard, we're going to have an influx of visitors in just a few short weeks into our city. I am thrilled, and I think regardless of political party, and I think I can speak for almost all of you in this room, I am thrilled that the Republican Convention is coming to our city. It will showcase our city on a national stage when the country looks at Cleveland, Ohio in July. When the world looks at Cleveland in July, they're going to see a city that defies stereotypes. We're an industrial city, but we're so much more than that. We're the only city in the world with a statue of Gandhi on a street named for Martin Luther King. Some say Superman was created. I say actually Superman was born in Cleveland. We're the home, as Connie likes to point out, writer as she is, we're the home of the first open shelf library in the United States. Our emerald necklace, there's nothing like it really in the Midwest. Our emerald necklace runs into one of only a handful of national parks east of the Mississippi. I don't think Clevelanders and Ohioans quite understand how big a deal it is that we have a national park in this state. And I've offered to talk about all this and to give a speech about Cleveland's heritage at the convention, but for some reason they just haven't called yet. In addition to the coronation of Donald Trump, Republicans will bring some $400 million into this city through full hotel rooms, through packed restaurants and busy shops, in crowded buses, taxis, and a whole lot of town cars. But I hope the parties and the confetti don't obscure the fact that Cleveland, like much of this country, like much of Middle America, much of all of this country, that Cleveland is still hurting. 2.5 years ago, on a cold, snowy day in January, I attended a Martin Luther King breakfast. And a minister there said something we all know, but we don't think enough about. He said, your life expectancy is connected to your zip code. Whether you grow up in East Cleveland, whether you grow up in Shaker, whether you grow up in Westlake, whether you grow up in Appalachia, or a town like where I grew up in Mansfield, your life expectancy is connected to your zip code far too often. It determines whether you have access to quality health care, to the social support necessary to succeed, to a good education system. And unfortunately, many of the zip codes that are most lacking in opportunity are in this great city, and in cities like it that have been hollowed out due to globalization and policy choices that have been made in Washington. Connie and I moved into the city a few years ago. Our home is just south of Harvard, just south of off Broadway, just south of Slavic Village. The zip code is 44105. The housing crisis came to our state in places like Slavic Village before it hit the Sun Belt states. It was a slow burn. It was not about speculation. It wasn't about the boom and bust cycle that happened in California and Florida and Arizona. Beginning in 1995, and think about this, Ohio had 14 consecutive years of more foreclosures than the year before. 14 years in a row throughout our state, not just Cleveland, throughout our state, Ohio had more foreclosures than the year before. It was a result of a declining industrial base coupled with the kind of predatory lending that sunk its fangs into communities like Slavic Village. In the first half of 2007, my zip code, 44105, I'd said, 44105 had more foreclosures than any zip code in the United States of America. Factories close, people move out, cohesive communities break down. The population in Slavic Village dropped 27%, from down to 20,000 people. Other parts of Ohio, other parts of our country may not be struggling to the extent that Slavic Village is, but too many Americans everywhere are still hurting. Let's look at another zip code. Go to Fairview Park, 44126. Solid, working class, middle class neighborhood. Sort of place where you might find the person in the economic middle, the typical American. Look back 4 decades ago, a couple of East Coast political scientists searched for the person in the economic middle, the most representative of all Americans. They settled on the wife of a union machinist, 47 years old in Dayton, Ohio. Let's call her Joan for a minute. If we look at Joan's household 40 years ago, she was solidly middle class. Her husband had a good-paying union job. She and her husband had a decent defined pension benefit because of their union negotiated pension. When her husband retired in the early 1980s, this is Joan coming from 1971, making that contrast. When her husband retired in the early 80s, her family could count on the median defined benefit of about $10,400 in 2015 dollars, coupled with a Social Security check, again in 2015 dollars, of about $1,000 a month. Today, the typical American, let's go back to Fairview Park, may be more like a 55-year-old woman whom we'll call Sheila. Many of her Fairview Park neighbors have little retirement security, no wage growth, and in the great majority of cases, no union to fight for them. Sheila may have a 401k, but she likely has no defined pension benefit. She'll retire with less than, and this counts her 401k if she has one. She's in the middle. Remember, the economic middle. Half the country's poorer than she, half the country's better off than she. She'll retire with less than $20,000 in savings. That's not per year, that's her savings. Remember, half of Americans are worse off than Sheila. Social Security's modest benefits will be nearly all she has for retirement, about between $1,000 and $1,100 a month. Over the last 40 years, productivity in this country has gone up steadily. GDP has gone up steadily. Corporate profits have gone up steadily and more. But workers like Sheila haven't seen the benefits of their contributions to this economic growth. Instead, they've seen their wages stagnate, they've seen their purchasing power steadily erode, despite working harder and producing more. Put simply, Sheila's hard work is not paying off like it did for her parents. She works full time, but feels like she's falling further and further behind. And remember, half the country is worse off than Sheila. Her neighbor lost his job during the recession, and like 2.5 million Americans can only find part-time work, a number that's doubled over the past 5 decades. That part-time job that her neighbor has might be with a food service subcontractor, might be as a security guard, which only offers irregular schedules, low pay, and usually no benefits. His hours change constantly, and his family can never count on him to be home with the kids when she's at work because he doesn't know when he'll be called in for a shift. Americans have a right to be angry about this. People are angry at the system because so many of the policy solutions that they've been offered aren't really solutions at all. So-called free trade has really meant unfair trade. Trickle-down economics, as the cliche goes, has never trickled down. But behind all the vitriol we've heard in this year's campaign, the ideas you're going to hear next month out of Quicken Loan Arena are the same old failed policies that have betrayed our city and our state. Donald Trump certainly loves the sound of his own voice. We've seen him brag about everything from the size of his hands to the size of his supposed donations to veterans, which he didn't actually make until Connie's profession shamed him into keeping his word. We've seen him insult and degrade women and immigrants and disabled people and Muslims and war heroes. Governor Kasich was right to label that path the path of darkness. What we haven't seen are meaningful solutions, to improve the lives of working people. We've just seen more of the same. More trickle-down economics, more Wall Street deregulation, more tax cuts for the wealthiest people in this country. Now, we used to have a social compact in this country that promised if you worked hard, if you played by the rules, if you showed up to work, if you put in the hours, you could get ahead. You could make enough to put dinner on the table, to take the kids to the movies, to send your daughters to college, to save for retirement. But over the past several decades, the value of work has eroded. Americans work longer hours for less pay. Protections and benefits that were once guaranteed by the government or bargained for by trade unions have eroded. Workers are holding up their end of the bargain, but sharing in less and less of the wealth that they create. Instead of being viewed as company assets worthy of investment, they're simply vehicles for productivity. Let me give you an example. More and more big companies, especially large consumer companies like the airlines, subcontract their low-wage work out to other companies you've never heard of. You know the people in the airport who push the wheelchairs? You've seen them, pushing wheelchairs, driving the carts. You may not realize those employees are mostly paid with tips. They're actually paid the tip minimum wage, $4.05 an hour. But how many tips do you think these workers get? And how many people know that they're tipped wage earners? But because they work for a faceless subcontractor, the airlines can sort of wash their hands of responsibility, and these workers don't share in the benefits accorded to workers for United or workers for the old Continental. That's why we need to raise labor standards. One of the best things Congress did last year was to pass my bill to permanently expand the earned income tax credit. We got it done as part of a bipartisan deal on tax extenders. Ronald Reagan called the EITC one of the best anti-poverty measure to come out of Congress. We need to build on our success with the EITC and expand it to cover all low-income workers. We took another important step last month. Vice President Biden, Secretary of Labor Perez, and I flew to Columbus to announce nationally in Columbus, Ohio, a new overtime rule that will give millions of American workers a raise. Thank you. Right now, before the rule change takes effect, millions of American workers making $30,000, $25,000, $30,000, $40,000 a year, millions of American workers making $25,000, $30,000, $35,000, $40,000 a year are classified as supervisory. They work as much as 50 or 60 hours a week. They don't get paid a cent, let alone time and a half for those hours over 40. 140,000 Ohioans fall into that category. As the Vice President said in the announcement, when the middle class does well, the rich do very, very well, and the poor have hope. The middle class does well, the rich do very, very well, and the poor have hope. These aren't workers looking for a handout. They're just looking to be paid for their work and be paid what they're worth. We need to do more to ensure their hard work's rewarded. That means raising the national minimum wage to $15 an hour. It means guaranteeing paid sick leave and paid family leave. It means ensuring equal pay for equal work. It means ending workplace abuses that steal from workers' paychecks by misclassifying them as independent contractors or by forcing them to work off the clock. It means rewarding work through the tax code. Workers without children right now making minimum wage hardly earn any EITC, and childless workers under 25 don't qualify for EITC tax credits at all. That means young people and workers without children become the only group of workers in America who are literally, because of the payroll tax, who are literally taxed deeper into poverty. Think about that. When we strengthen the EITC, we help more Americans support their families, encourage more people to work, and we have fewer Americans relying on government benefits. We also need to recognize the changing nature of work over the past few decades. Much has been made in the media over the past few years about the so-called gig economy, and the gig economy meaning Uber and Handy and TaskRabbit. The debate has tended to treat those companies as entirely new inventions and is centered on whether we need to change our labor laws to accommodate these supposedly new business models. We do need to update our labor laws to be sure, but these business models are not really new. Only the technology serving these business models is. The employer-employee arrangements in these app-based companies are just new versions of those widely used in the construction industry and some other industries to cut labor costs at the expense of American workers. This move toward independent contracting and other alternative work arrangements has been underway for at least 2 decades. It's too early to tell if the technology that allows these companies to grow, particularly in big cities, will mean more growth to the independent contracting business model. If this is a wave of the future, it's all the more reason to do something about it. If this trajectory continues, the middle class will continue to shrink, and consumption rates, which drive the U.S. economy, hence Biden's statement, when the middle class does well, the wealthy do very, very well, and the poor have hope. When this trajectory continues, the middle class will continue to shrink, and consumption rates driving the U.S. economy will decline, and we know how dangerous that is. It doesn't mean outlawing these business models, but it does mean not trying to turn the clock, because we're not trying to turn the clock back to a different era. But these are benefits. There are benefits to contracting. There are benefits to harvesting new technology to reinvigorate old industries. We just need to allow our labor standards to evolve with them. Having a vibrant, dynamic economy with flexibility for workers and businesses in the 21st century shouldn't and can't mean giving up on the 20th century workplace advances that created the world's largest middle class. A healthy workforce invests in it. A healthy economy invests in its workforce. We need innovative solutions to allow workers and companies to take advantage of non-traditional business models and new technologies without losing those workplace protections. I'm working on a proposal to create a new benefits bank that would allow workers who are part-time, independent contractors, or freelancers to accrue paid sick leave, retirement benefits, and of course have their taxes withheld. The benefits accrued in the bank should be portable so workers can move from gig to gig in this gig economy without losing out on retirement savings and the paid time off that they've earned. Each worker should have an account that tracks her tax liabilities like Medicare and Social Security, her sick leave, her unemployment insurance, her retirement benefits, her workers' compensation, and her vacation days. Employers would prorate their contributions to employees' benefit banks based on the hours an employee worked. Not only will this preserve flexibility for employers and workers already using this business model, which is fine, it will allow more workers to strike out on their own, which is even better. Lack of benefits is a major barrier to anyone who wants to do freelance work and take on more contract work. So when we increase our safety net for all workers, regardless of the sort of work they do, we make our economy more dynamic. The other side of the coin is that when companies, employers take advantage of their employees, of their workers, when they refuse to pay them a living wage, when they refuse to help them save for retirement, when they refuse to provide them decent health care, they create a drag on our economy. When companies pay poverty-level wages, someone else picks up the tab. It's taxpayers in the form of food stamps and housing vouchers and Medicaid and other government aid to keep those families afloat. These employers are contributing to the growing problem of economic insecurity, and we need to create incentives for them to rethink their approach to workforce investment. That's why I propose, as part of the benefit bank, a new fee on large corporations where large numbers of their employees rely on government benefits. It's simple. If a firm it's pretty simple. If a firm chooses to pay its workers so little that many are forced into government assistance, then that firm must reimburse American taxpayers. The fee will be assessed based on the percentage of that company's workforce that is below 200% of the federal poverty level. This will save taxpayers money. It will give companies an added incentive to invest in their greatest resource, their human capital. Taking these solutions, expanded EITC, guaranteed paid sick leave and family leave, higher minimum wage, a benefits bank for contract workers, a fee for corporations who pay poverty wages, that will help remake our safety net to keep pace with the changes that have already remade our economy. Now, I can already hear the arguments coming from those who will be filling up Quicken Loans Arena. I'm not talking about the thousands who will be there in June watching the Cavaliers become the 2016 champions. I'm talking about a different group of people descending on Quicken Loans Arena in July. Now, conservatives, I love this. Conservatives always say, if you raise the minimum wage, we're going to have to raise prices and lay off workers. But they never say that when a CEO gets a 7-figure bonus or a golden parachute. That never affects prices or never affects wages, layoffs. Of course, minimum wage workers won't be stowing their paychecks away in Swiss bank accounts. They pump their hard-earned money right back into the local economy, supporting Main Street businesses and growing jobs. Our country, in the end, is only as strong as the families in zip codes 44105 Slavic Village, our neighborhood, or 44126 Fairview Park. People want to get ahead. They want to reach the middle class. They want the opportunity to stay there. But they can only do that if their hard work actually pays off the way it used to. Now, I know we're in the middle of a heated presidential campaign. Congress isn't going to take up these ideas tomorrow. But the problems facing this country are far too serious for us to throw up our hands. The idea that we should be rewarding work is a bipartisan one. That's why every single president since 1975, every single president has expanded the Earned Income Tax Credit. It's why we're able to cut through the gridlock in a Republican Congress and pass my bill to make EITC permanent a year ago. And that's why I'm still optimistic. A friend of mine in the Senate, a fellow named Roy Blunt, conservative Republican from Missouri, he was Secretary of State of Missouri the same time I was Secretary of State of Ohio, so we've known each other for years. He said to somebody the other day, he said, you know, I've known Sherrod Brown for 30 years, and we've agreed on a total of 5 issues. But then he said, the best part, then he said, all 5 of those issues are now federal law. I mean, that's how you legislate. You find things that, despite the divisiveness that we've seen in this campaign, and as Steve, we were talking earlier, we certainly have seen that. I think what continues to unite us as Americans is a belief that anyone who works hard and plays by the rules ought to be able to get ahead. That's been the American dream, that every generation has it a little better off, that we all, if we work hard, we play by the rules, we benefit from that. I think most of us still agree that when work pays off, we get more productive workers, we get more prosperous businesses, we get stronger families. If we can agree on that, we can find a way forward and create opportunity in every zip code in this great country. Thank you.
Today at the City Club of Cleveland, we are enjoying a Friday forum featuring United States Senator Sherrod Brown. In addition to being entertaining, I have to point out he's right on time, so he's preserved a good amount of time for questions and answers. So we welcome questions from everyone here, City Club members, guests, students, or those of you joining us via our radio broadcast, webcast, or our live simulcast at the Parmer Snow branch of the Cuyahoga County Public Library. And if you'd like to tweet a question, please tweet it at the City Club, and our staff will endeavor to work it into the program. Holding our microphones today are City Club Director of Programming, Stephanie Jansky, and City Club Content, oh, you have friends here, and City Club Content Associate, Teddy Eisenberg. We have to clap for him, too. First question, please.
To me, very, very good speech, but we have a major epidemic, teenage pregnancy in this country. The teenager has no chance, the mother has no chance. We've got to do a better job of for one, preventing teenage pregnancy, but once we have that teenage pregnancy, we've got to take care of that teenager, get him back to school. That kid has got to have a chance. We're doing nothing constructive, as I see it, that other countries do to get these people being taught by or raised by competent people and become solid citizens. We're promoting gangs, crimes. Any suggestions?
Well, first thing you don't do is, if you're a member of the legislature, is cut funding for Planned Parenthood. That's the first thing you don't do. I mean, you look, we don't always in our country want to look at other countries and see what they do that works and what they do that doesn't work. We're more likely to want to look at what they do that doesn't work than the other. But I think that our family leave policy, some of those issues that we don't invest in early childhood the way that most countries do. Most rich countries do. I read a book a while ago, a number of years ago, that compared the number of words that a small child up to first grade, say, number of words that child hears if they grow up in an educated family, if they grow up in a kind of a working class family with a little less education, if they grew up in a poor family where the parents didn't finish high school, and you're already so far behind by the time you get to the first grade if you don't have that sort of enriched kind of education. And that's the importance of Head Start. It's the importance of more investment in early childhood education. It's the reason that we need to work harder assisting the Cleveland Food Bank and some of the great things that go on in this community. And it's education, it's all of that. But when we see this persistent decline in income, all that feeds into it. It feeds into the opioid epidemic. It feeds into teenage pregnancies. It feeds into so many of the social problems. I mean, I don't know if I've ever been at the City Club and quoted Jim Rhodes, but I'm going to do that for a moment. And Jim Rhodes said the best social program's a good job, and it clearly is. And we just don't pay enough attention to that now. But you diagnose the problem perfectly. The solutions seem difficult, but they really shouldn't be if we have the political will to do what we need to do.
Sherrod, I wonder if you could comment on why the House is nickel and diming the efforts to prevent epidemics of Zika and Ebola in the United States.
Well, in a nutshell, Connie and I had the honor earlier this week of going to visit John and Annie Glenn in their apartment for about an hour. And I had called John and Annie a month before on their 73rd anniversary. And Annie told, this is not exactly the answer you're looking for yet, but Annie said, I said, did you want to get married when you were still in high school? She said, yeah. Our parents wouldn't let us get married in high school because they said it wouldn't last. And so they had to wait like 3 more years to get married, but they've done all right. But what John, the thing that John and Annie just have incredible they just have such a moral center to them. And the thing that bothers John Glenn the most about our country in the last 20 years, about Congress anyway, is that almost every elected Republican took an oath from Grover Norquist saying they would never vote for revenues. They wouldn't close tax loopholes, and they wouldn't vote for revenues. And look where that set us. It's meant that we underfund CDC, we underfund with the money, the very inadequate amount of money the House, as you said, that the House appropriated was money for Zika taken out of Ebola instead of real dollars in public health. And I know I've talked to this metaphor before. I wear on my lapel a depiction of a canary in a bird cage. It's largely about public health. 100 years ago, the workers took the canary down in the mine. And in those days, the life expectancy was about 45 years in this country. Today, it's 3 decades longer, in large part because of public health, because we invest in everything from workers' comp to Medicare to safe drinking water to public health. And look what we've done. We've conquered smallpox. Smallpox killed literally hundreds of millions of people in the 20th century around the world. Polio, many of you in this group, the Boy Scouts certainly accepted, but many of you in this group remember going to school with a couple of kids at least who had polio and walked with a limp, had some disability because the fear that families had about their kids in the 50s and prior to the 50s about polio, we conquered polio. The Ebola virus, zero, in spite of the scare from Fox News and Rush Limbaugh leading up to the 2014 election, when we were all going to die from Ebola virus and we were supposed to not allow any Americans to fly out of all those things. 0 people in the United States contract the Ebola virus and died because we have a great public health system. But it's stretched thin. We're not doing what we need to do. And I just urge all of you to put more pressure on House Republicans on this to come up with anything close to the president's budget, because it's not just Zika this year. It's a public health system that builds on year by year and really does. I mean, public health's all about helping everybody live longer and better lives. It's not about the rich. It's not about the poor. It's everybody. The Centers for Disease Control is the best organization of its kind in the world. There's nothing close to doing what they've done, and we are giving away so much if we let that agency and our public health officials in Cleveland and Cuyahoga County, if we let it atrophy. The last point about that, speaking of investment, I was meeting with the Cleveland Health Department 2 months ago maybe, and we were talking about housing in Cleveland. About 80 to 90% of the homes in Cleveland were built prior to my birth date prior to the 1950s. About 85% of the homes in Cleveland. I asked them, of that housing stock, the 80% of the housing stock in Cleveland, the homes that were built World War II or prior, what percentage of them have toxic levels of lead? You know what they said? 99. It's, we read about Flint and water, and that's a serious, serious problem. But the bigger problem is the homes and the dust and the paint. And when you open a window with a pulley, the kind of place Connie used to live in Shaker, when you open the window up, the dust flies off the cords, the ropes on the pulley. The homes in parts of Cleveland that used to be smelters, and there used to be smelters in those parts of town. The homes, the dirt in around those homes. Nobody thought about this before. The dirt has high toxic levels of lead. All of those public health problems we better address, because your question about kids and having a chance in living what we would call more prosperous, normal lives, they're so behind the curve if we don't deal with the problem of lead.
Thank you, Senator. I would like to follow up on your analysis earlier about retirement, and especially women when they get to retirement age. So many women from our generation stayed home with the kids and weren't given any credit, any income credit for staying home and being stay-at-home moms. Do you see any hope of ever having Social Security take that into consideration as part of a wage so that their retirement benefit can be increased because of the work that they did to be a family mother?
Thank you for that question. The answer is not right now, but I am optimistic about that for this reason. The president who was not necessarily, I don't think it's spoken out on this before until this week. He said that we should do what we can to find ways of increasing Social Security. I mean, I understand the issues of people saying that Social Security is not sustainable, all the issues that we deal with, that Social Security will run out of money, or all the sky is falling, but with some legitimacy about the fiscal condition of Social Security, much of which can be fixed by raising the cap, but we can talk more about that another time. But so I think that, I think when you look at this whole retirement issue and how people have such trouble saving, they have trouble saving because their incomes are lower or not gone up commensurately with costs. So when incomes have declined by and large for much of the middle, that's one problem. The second reason they're not saving is that they're not so retirement secure, obviously, is because of the defined pension benefits decline. But I think that Social Security is going to have to pick up a big part of what we need to do here, and that's finding ways for Social Security to do what you just suggested. It's finding ways to have a cost of living adjustment based not on a COLA, cost of living adjustment, determined from a 40-year-old worker, but it should be tracked for a 60 or 70-year-old retiree who has a very different cost structure in their lifestyle. Obviously, more medicine, less transportation from 70 compared to 40. All of those things I think we need to look at. But I know that Secretary Clinton, and I know she's going to be president. I hope she is. I think she is. But I think she is very tuned into this. I think one of the overlooked parts of her resume is what she did with family issues when she was a young lawyer, and how important that is to her, and how important, again, the questions that both of you ask would matter to her about young people and giving them opportunities. And so I really do think that she's going to be looking at this in a pretty comprehensive way that can be helpful.
Hi, Senator. Yesterday I shared a Facebook post by Dan Rather that I thought really recognized the threat that Donald Trump poses to our freedoms of press and really the democracy that the press supports. And I know this may be a question more for Connie than for you, but I think you're tied together somehow.
Well,
and
people say she tells me how to vote. So
when
I tell her what to write. Okay. The opposite of that. Okay.
When will the media and really major figures in our politics and government call him out on those threats?
Well, it's interesting. The New York Times 3 days ago, maybe 4 days ago, had an editorial about, because it's such a target-rich environment, if they start doing it every day, that it just almost normalizes it. They were conflicted in print, their editorial board, and I don't understand the dynamics of editorial boards, but I've had many interesting discussions with them, but as you have and your boss has. But I think that I think they wrestle with best how to do this. In some ways, every criticism he gets plays into his base, but I don't think his base is nearly as large as a lot of people think. I mean, I have great concern about Trump, but I think that if we do what we need to do, he will not be president of the United States. But I also think that he could be, and so it is up to the media. I don't know how to answer your question other than it's most important what we can do individually is talk to people. I mean, in some ways it doesn't really matter what the plain dealer or the New York Times writes about Trump, nor does it matter what an elected official says about Trump. It matters what you say to your friends about Trump, and put it in some historical context of respect for the media, respect for women, respect for people's religions, respect for people with disability, all the things that you can reach voters with one at a time. Because that's how you That's how you discredit a demagogue, not by pounding him on him through the media that he so blames for everything anyway. That might be helpful, it might not, but what you do individually to discredit, I don't care if you discredit him personally, but discredit the views that he purports to have out there.
Senator,
Jay,
good afternoon. First of all, it means a lot to us Clevelanders that you and Connie moved to a Cleveland address, and I just want to
And we love
acknowledge
living
that.
there. Thanks.
Probably surprise to many people in the room here, but in the federal budget at the beginning of this year, a unimaginable case of bipartisanship broke out, and you and and Senator Portman teamed up to stand up for Clevelanders and 17 other states to break loose TARP money for hardest hit states, one of them being Ohio. And many of the things that you addressed in your opening remarks could be addressed through these funds that were targeted to these states. The federal government did its job, and thank you for taking that stand. Unfortunately, our state government fell short and failed, perhaps intentionally, to do its job and shortchanged cities like Cleveland over $100 million in funds that are sitting there to be accessed by us. Can you help? Can you give advice? Can you help us correct a application error for funds that we really are owed and desperately need and will not ever have a chance to see again? Thank you, Senator.
Thank you for that, Jay. Thanks for bringing up that question. Two things to read about what Jay's talking about. One is the Akron Beacon Journal editorialized on this whole hardest hit fund issue about 6 weeks ago, soon after the application was changed at the last minute in Columbus, the Ohio Housing Finance Agency. The second piece to read is Steve Koff of the Plain Dealer, who's a fabulous reporter and did very good in-depth work looking at Freedom Information Act, looking at emails about what happened on this. And I'll summarize as quickly as I can. Senator Stabenow, representing Michigan, and I got in a end-of-year appropriations bill, got $2 billion for the hardest hit fund. This money can be spent three ways. It can be spent for home demolition in blighted areas. It costs about $11,000 a home to remove a home and clean up all the asbestos and the wire and everything you have to do, about $11,000. It costs about $60,000, second alternative, to renovate a house, meaning new windows, clean out any of the asbestos or anything, and paint and do all the things you need to do. An average of $60,000, and it costs about $12,000 a house to remediate the lead. That doesn't mean remove; it means clean and paint. So that keeps that home safe from lead poisoning for 6, 8, 10 years, depending on the condition of the home and depending on the way people live in it when they live there. So this money, most of it was going to go to demolition. Well, my staff, the banking committee, because I'm ranking in banking and it's a housing issue and that's part of the banking committee. The banking staff, I personally, Treasury Department, all talked to the Ohio Housing Finance Agency every day or two. I didn't call every day or two. I talked to them during the process. My staff in Treasury Department talked to them almost every single day leading up to that application. The application was written in a way, Ohio, of the $2 billion, Ohio would have gotten $350 million of it. Think of the percentage of that because of the way we wrote it. Michigan was slated to get something like 280 of that. We were the two biggest states, partly because we have the biggest problems, partly because we wrote it to help cities like Cleveland and Detroit and Toledo and Dayton and Youngstown and Mansfield and everywhere else. So we were talking to them right up until the end. At the end, we think when Jay's little phrase there when he said on purpose or not, I think is how you said it, it looked to me, and I don't know this, but they changed the application the last 48 hours or so, it looks like, from what we thought at the time and what Steve Koff's article suggests. And what they did was they wanted all the money to go to, almost all of it to go to demolition. And they were not, the Treasury Department said, you do that, you're going to lose a lot of money. So did we, so did others. They went ahead and did it. The only explanation that makes any sense to me is philosophically, The people in charge of state government didn't believe that we should spend money keeping people in their homes. We should spend money instead knocking down these homes and starting again. That counseling, and part of that also was counseling. I left that part out of the three buckets. Kind of part of it is money for counseling, so that you won't be foreclosed on. You can find a way to work out with the bank. If you as a homeowner don't have great sophistication, and the bank people you deal with, the bank are a little more sophisticated than getting a counseling service in the neighborhood, and there are great ones in Cleveland, AHS and others right on Broadway that I drive when I drive downtown, go by it every day. That they could help people keep people in their homes. The Republicans have always objected to that whole idea of counseling, to spending public money to keep people in their homes, and unfortunately, it looks like that digging in the way they did, that changing the application, looks to have cost the state $150 million in hardest hit funds. And I don't know if the only solution is this: if other states are as inept as Ohio and they don't spend all their money, there will be a third round and we can reapply. And that's, as I said, I'm usually optimistic. To Janet's question, to other questions, I don't know how to be optimistic. Connie can attest this. I've never been so angry at anything in my professional life that I can think of as I was when I saw what they did, because we were sure that we were going to get, we were sure we were going to get $350 million. I said it publicly. I don't care if I was embarrassed, because I wasn't. I'm not embarrassed for me. I was embarrassed for what it meant to our state. But it was just, I'm still flabbergasted by it.
So the United States is said to be one of the wealthiest countries in the history of the world, yet we also have one of the highest childhood poverty rates. What can we do at a state and a federal level to ensure that this rate declines?
Good question. Thank you. Your troop is Elyria, right? You're Elyria? Oh, you're Avon Lake. I'm sorry. Okay. It's almost Elyria. Thank you for that. I would not have had that insight when I was his age and wearing that uniform. Sorry to answer with a story, but I'm going to do it since I have the microphone and you don't. In 1968, I became an Eagle Scout, and every year in Mansfield, where I grew up, there's a dinner of honoring the Eagle Scouts that Troops 110 and 106 and 121 had all produced. And there were about 15 of us, and it was a dinner at the downtown hotel, and the speaker was Colonel John Glenn. So I got to meet John Glenn on my picture with John Glenn when I was a really geeky-looking 15-year-old. Connie's words, thank you. I have a picture with John Glenn when the tradition in the Senate is that a sitting or former senator can escort new senators at swearing-in time down the center aisle, the Capitol of the Senate, to be sworn in. So I have a picture of John Glenn circa 1968 and circa 2007. It was kind of cool. Anyway, I already forgot your question. No, I didn't. Sorry. I want you all to feel okay. But a lot of the stuff, thank you for that. A lot of the things that I talked about, that it's government action sometimes. It's business act. It's all of us in communities. It's federal government. It's local government. It's state government. It's partnerships. It's the earned income tax credit. It's a higher minimum wage. It's giving people opportunity with better investment in early childhood education. I mean, the Avon Lake schools. The Shore men and women, if I recall, is a very good school system. But not every school system in Lorain County has the opportunities that you do, as you know. And we've got to do better. And that zip code story has so stuck with me ever since I heard it. That if your zip code, if it's Avon Lake, you're going to have more opportunities than if it's downtown Lorain, as you know, or if it's Appalachia. And we've just got to do better. I mean, when Ohio, this is just. I don't mean to beat up on state government because it's really all of our faults. Ohio is 50th in the country in infant mortality for black babies. And we're 47th overall for infant mortality. We're not a poor state. We're not the richest state anymore like we might have been 2 generations ago, one of the richest states. We're more in the middle. But that our infant mortality rate, and so often the kids that are dying young, they're in the shadow of the Cleveland Clinic, or they're in the shadow of Nationwide Children's Hospital in Columbus. So it's not, and I know these hospitals are really doing, a lot of them, including the clinic in UH and especially Metro, Kristen, but are really doing yeoman's work on dealing with this. But it's so much more than that. It's the lead, it's the parents' education level, it's the the income level of people. It's the school system. It's all of that. And we just, and that's why, and I'm not here to campaign for Hillary, I'm really not, but that's why somebody with a background that's had such an intense interest on it takes a village kind of, I think she wrote that in another book called originally, about raising kids, and we just got to do way better. But thanks for, you can make that your Eagle project on doing something with this, okay? Okay.
Hello, thank you for speaking with us today. I had a question regarding the $15 minimum wage.
Yeah.
So you said that you support this for the United States as a whole, but as I'm sure you're aware, we're currently debating this issue heavily in Cleveland. What kind of roadblocks are in place that are preventing us from making this a reality, and how do we get around them?
To making it nationally a reality or Cleveland a reality?
Specifically Cleveland. You could go broader if you'd like, though.
Thank you for that. Like I said to him, I have the microphone, right? Okay. Didn't Ronald Reagan say that? I have the microphone. I quoted him twice Ronald Reagan today and once Jim Rhodes. That's pretty good, one speech. Sorry. I support the $15 minimum wage nationally. I support the efforts. I think that I'm hopeful that SEIU and the people pushing $15 in Cleveland will sit down, both sides, the mayor, the business community, the union, and the activists on $15 will sit down and figure out what's the best way to do this for Cleveland. We all agree it should be national. We all agree if it's not national, it should be state. And some want to do a tiered, make it take effect over 3 years, make it 12 initially, then 13, 14, 15. The California law, I believe, is 15. Implemented over, I think, till 2020. The bill I'm a co-sponsor of, the $15 in Congress, is tiered over, I believe, 3 or 4 years to reach 20, and then it's indexed, or to reach 15, then it's indexed around the year 2020. That's ideal, but I think it's important that negotiations take place. What do you do for a company? For a company that's lives right, it's right on the edge of town, and particularly if they're a retailer, do they move somewhere else if you raise it immediately to 15? That's a question to answer. But when I look at, ideally, I think the most important part of this $15 an hour in Cleveland is that the big employers, the really big employers that hire a lot of low-income workers, and those are hospitals and hotels especially, that they raise their wages. I know that I had a meeting with Toby Cosgrove recently where this Cleveland Clinic has raised to 12. UH has done the same. Some of these big institutions subcontract in some cases their food service or their security or their janitorial. I'm not sure what each of those does, so I'm not accusing anybody of anything here. But I know that can't be a loophole, that we need to find a way for the big institutions especially to raise their wages. And I just hope that both sides can sit down, come to some agreement. There will be pain. I understand employers, for good reasons, don't want to jump that high that fast. But I also understand that we're seeing in companies in higher profits, higher productivity, and wages haven't kept up, and we've got to do something about it.
So Ms. Schultz and Senator Brown, thank you for choosing 44105 in which to live. I have the pleasure of working with a lot of businesses throughout Slavic Village, many of whom are manufacturers that have openings all the time, mainly because folks in the baby boomer generation are retiring. And they tell us that they don't have a problem finding folks who want to take those jobs. They're always looking for folks who have soft skills and who can pass drug tests. They're not necessarily looking for trained professionals to take these $40,000, $50,000 jobs. What can we do about this?
Well, that's a good question. I hear that all the time. I think, sometimes that question's asked, when you said $40,000, $50,000 jobs, sometimes that question's asked and the wages are so low that I don't look at it askance. It's a legitimate, honorable question, but that I think that's part of the solution. But in cases where the wages are higher, we've got a problem. We've got a problem. Partly I think it's because we don't invest well enough in education and in starting with, this is a little bit starting with early childhood, we don't invest well enough, and that affects their qualifications later. I think what we've done with career centers has been pretty spectacular in this country. What we've done with community colleges is equally so, maybe even more so. And so I think part of it is that. I think the solution seems pretty elusive because people have been asking that question for 5 years now. I mean, I do roundtables in every place in the state, and I've been to a lot of small towns where I'll sit with 15, 20 people, and there's always a small company or a company of 100, 200 workers that they can't find people. And the answer is they can't, they talk about drug tests, they talk about the soft skills, they talk about people not thinking they need to show up to work every day. And those are the part. And I would add one other thing. I was talking to Mayor Coleman in Columbus, who was one of this country's great mayors for many years, and that city is pretty amazing now, in part, not wholly because of his work, but part. And he was saying, this was in 2007, and President Bush at that point and the Congress had cut summer jobs programs. And we scaled it back up during the Recovery Act with Obama, but then the budgets just made it damn near impossible. And he was saying the importance of the summer job program is not even the money for these kids, that they'll get some money to do whatever to help their families or even to go to Columbus State. It's to teach them how to work and to teach them that they got to show up every day and teach them they got to dress right and teach them they got to do X, Y, and Z right. And when we lose these summer jobs programs, one, kids are going to more likely get in trouble, of course. But second, it really is the time when somebody's 15 or 16 years old, you hire them to work in the city parks, and maybe their work isn't the most important thing for the society, the work they do, but it is the training for these kids to give them a bit more of a chance in life. And I mean, I didn't have that problem because my dad gave me no choice but to work on our family farm, and I complained because I had to work so hard, but I learned to milk Guernseys and tell farm jokes on the ag committee, so it's kind of cool.
Today at the City Club of Cleveland, we have been enjoying a Friday forum featuring United States Senator Sherrod Brown. Today's forum was the Stephen A. Minter Endowed Forum, made possible by the member banks of the Cleveland Foundation in honor of Mr. Minter's retirement from the foundation in July 2003. So we deeply appreciate the generous support of Chase, First Merit, Huntington Bank, Key Bank, and PNC. Additionally, we welcome guests at tables hosted by the Cleveland Clinic, Cleveland Neighborhood Progress, Cuyahoga Community College, Cuyahoga County Democratic Party, Friends of Sherrod Brown, a lot of friends of yours here today, the Greater Cleveland Partnership, Policy Matters Ohio, the Center for Community Solutions, the Centers for Families and Children, and University Hospitals. Finally, we welcome students from the Boy Scouts of America. Thank you very much for attending. Student participation in City Club forums is made possible by the Law Foundation. And that brings us to the end of today's forum. Thank you, Senator Brown. As always, you were outstanding. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. This forum is now adjourned.
For information on upcoming speakers or for podcasts of the City Club, go to cityclub.org.
Production and distribution of City Club forums on IdeaStream are made possible by the generous support of PNC and the Raskin Family Fund, with additional funding from Cleveland State University, Robert Conrad, and the Payne Fund.